When you think of a billionaire, you imagine someone who can buy anything: yachts, private jets, sprawling estates. But Jonathan Hale had learned the hard way that money couldn't buy the one thing he wanted most: his son's joy. 3 years earlier, a reckless driver had shattered that world in an instant. His 12-year-old son, Lucas, had been paralyzed from the waist down, and suddenly, Jonathan realized that no amount of wealth could protect the people he loved most. Since that day, his mansion had become a fortress, not of gold and art, but of caretakers, doctors, therapists, nurses, and maids cycling in and out like seasonal staff. Some were kind, some careless, some indifferent, and Jonathan, having witnessed their failures firsthand, had learned a bitter truth: trust was a luxury even wealth couldn't guarantee. Voices raised by accident, rough tugs on a wheelchair, therapists skipping exercises, every lapse chipped away at Jonathan's peace of mind. So he turned to the only thing left that could give him control: discreet cameras. Tiny, silent, hidden in lamps, corners, and shelves. They weren't about paranoia, they were about safety. They were about Lucas. But even watching these feeds became a burden. Seeing his son's daily struggle through a lens felt like reopening a wound. When the previous maid left abruptly, citing emotional exhaustion, Jonathan barely paused before hiring a new one. Her name was Elena. Her resume was plain, her references brief but sincere, and during the interview, she asked only one question: "Does Lucas like music?" Jonathan had barely registered it at the time. The first week passed quietly. Jonathan, buried in meetings and late-night calls, rarely saw her. But Lucas seemed different. The boy who once answered questions with shrugs or monosyllables lingered in the kitchen when Elena hummed softly while cooking. His eyes followed her movements with a curiosity Jonathan hadn't seen in years. Then, one evening, Jonathan returned home earlier than usual, exhausted, restless, and for reasons he couldn't explain, opened the camera feeds. He expected nothing. That's why what he saw unsettled him so deeply. On the screen, Elena was sitting on the floor beside Lucas's wheelchair. Not speaking, not doing therapy, not even touching him. She was simply there, matching her breathing to his, palms resting on the cool tile. After a long moment, she whispered something Jonathan couldn't make out. Lucas's shoulders, usually tense, slowly relaxed. Then Elena did something extraordinary. She tapped lightly on the floor, a gentle rhythm that barely registered. She handed Lucas 2 wooden spoons. The boy hesitated, unsure, then tapped them together. Elena smiled. Not the polite, practiced smile of a worker, but a raw, encouraging smile, and began tapping back. Slowly, a rhythm emerged, clumsy at first, then steady. And Lucas laughed. A full, free laugh. Jonathan froze, realizing he hadn't heard that sound in months. This wasn't therapy. It wasn't in any care manual. It was connection. Later that night, Jonathan watched another feed. Elena was adjusting Lucas's blanket with painstaking care, speaking to him as if he were a partner in conversation rather than a burden. "You don't have to be brave all the time," she whispered. "You can be tired. I'll stay." Jonathan felt his chest tighten. Over the next days, he observed more. Elena read to Lucas, not children's picture books, but adventure novels, pausing to ask his opinion on the hero's choices. She guided him through exercises long after the therapist had left, turning each movement into a game, celebrating effort rather than success. Then came the moment that shattered Jonathan's assumptions. One late night, the living room camera captured Lucas in tears, fists clenched, voice trembling with a frustration he rarely expressed aloud. "I hate this chair. I hate being stuck." Jonathan's first instinct was to rush downstairs. But he stopped, compelled to watch. Elena knelt before him, face level with his, and did something he hadn't expected. She didn't argue. She didn't offer empty reassurance. She said simply, "I know." Then, gently, she placed Lucas's hands on her own legs. "Tell me what you miss," she said. Lucas faltered, then whispered, "Running." Elena nodded, guiding his hands as she slowly walked in place. "Then feel this," she said softly. "This is movement. Different doesn't mean gone." She narrated each step, inviting Lucas into the sensation, connecting mind and body. Lucas listened, breathing slowed, eyes focused. When she finished, she said, "Your body remembers. We'll remind it together." Jonathan felt tears blur the screen. In that moment, he understood something humbling. All his money, all his vigilance, all the hidden cameras had protected Lucas from harm, but none of it had given him hope. Elena did that without realizing anyone was watching. The next morning, Jonathan called Elena into his office. She stood calmly, hands folded, perhaps expecting criticism. Instead, he confessed about the cameras, not defensively, but with shame. He told her what he had seen. She listened quietly, then said softly, "I'm glad you saw the real him." Jonathan offered her a raise, a contract, anything she wanted. She shook her head. "Just let me keep helping him," she said. "Not as a job, as a promise." From that day on, the cameras remained, but Jonathan no longer watched out of fear. He watched to learn. Lucas began therapy with renewed determination, not because he thought he would walk tomorrow, but because he realized he was more than what he had lost. The mansion changed. Laughter echoed where silence had once lived. Jonathan, the billionaire who had believed control was protection, learned that sometimes the greatest safety comes from trust, compassion, and presence. In Elena, Lucas had found more than a caretaker. He had found someone who reminded him that life, even when limited, could still be full. And Jonathan learned the most expensive lesson wealth couldn't buy: love, patience, and empathy are more valuable than all the gold in the world. If this story touched you, if you believe that real change comes from compassion where we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like these remind us that humanity is the greatest wealth of all.